And as the war has increased,
on the international effort that we have led,
conducted an extraordinary military operation
to free its people and to defend the world from grave danger.
From 1945 to 2026, the US government has been involved in many regime changes in other nations around the world, some more successful than others. We're going to take a look at how each unfolded and the consequences that still affect the world today. It all starts with post-World War II Europe.
Without imports from America, Germans under our military government would starve. Every problem in Germany, housing, clothing, health, industry, is desperate, but the most acute is food. We are literally keeping our former enemies alive.
After World War II, the United States, under the Marshall Plan, officially known as the European Recovery Program, provided over $13 billion in aid to 16 Western European nations to rebuild their economies. This was a success in revitalizing industry, and agriculture helped spur an economic boom and laid the groundwork for European cooperation and integration, eventually leading to the formation of the EU and NATO. Post-World War II Asia Pacific.
We will arrive at Yokohama at 0930 hours. We will arrive at Yokohama at 0930 hours. Debarkation priority will be in accordance with the debarkation schedule.
In the late 1940s and 1950s, the US funneled billions in aid and military support into Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines to rebuild war-torn infrastructure. By replacing post-war chaos with strategic investment and stable alliances, the US successfully transformed devastated nations into the prosperous, democratic pillars of a new American-led global order. These initial successes of regime change happened when the US became the global superpower after World War II. Unfortunately, ever since, the US has had mostly failures in nation building due to an aggressive, covert foreign policy.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Iran, 1953.
In 1953, the United States, together with Britain, participated in a coup in Iran that got rid of Mossadegh.
Mossadegh and his government were swept from power in favor of General Zahedi. 300 killed and hundreds wounded is a conservative estimate.
The United States, in collaboration with the UK, orchestrated Operation Ajax through the CIA to overthrow Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh had nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, using bribery, propaganda, staged protests, and military support to reinstall the pro-US Shah. This secured Western oil interests and prevented perceived communist influence during the Cold War. The regime change was a short-term success from the US perspective, installing an authoritarian ally. But long-term, it failed, fostering an anti-American sentiment that contributed to the 1979 Iranian Revolution and ongoing instability. Operation Ajax resulted in an estimated 200 and 300 deaths. Guatemala, 1954. The CIA launched Operation PB Success to oust President Jacobo Arbenz, whose land reforms threatened United Fruit Company profits and raised fears of communism. By training and arming a rebel force, conducting psychological warfare, and executing bombing campaigns, this installed a pro-US right-wing dictator, marking a short-term success in containing leftist influence. However, it was a long-term failure, sparking decades of civil war, instability, and human rights abuses. The Guatemalan Civil War, triggered by the CIA coup, lasted 36 years and led to over 200,000 deaths.
Se irá a fusilar a quien esté en contra de la ley.
The painful truth in Guatemala is that the army has for 30 years abided by the most simple of maxims, namely that if you sympathize with the subversives, you're a communist, and communists are killed.
Congo, DRC, 1960s. During the Congo crisis, the US supported the arrest and assassination of Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba through CIA plans and funding, while providing covert aid to Joseph Mobutu's forces and participating in operations like Dragon Rouge to counter leftist and separatist threats. This helped to install Mobutu as a pro-US leader, achieving short-term success in stabilizing against communist influences. Long-term, it failed due to corruption, civil war, and regional unrest under his dictatorship. The Congo crisis between 1960 and 1965 contributed to an estimated 100,000 deaths from fighting, executions, and chaos by Mobutu's forces. For decades, instability under Mobutu's dictatorship led to millions more deaths in subsequent wars and famines, until his reign ended in 1997. South Vietnam, 1963.
There's a long history of our effort to prevent Vietnam from falling under the control of the communists. That is what we are now attempting to do, and as the war has increased in scope, our assistance has increased as a result of the requests of the government.
The Kennedy administration encouraged and sanctioned a military coup against President Ngo Dinh Diem. The US provided assurances, cut aid, and shared intelligence with generals due to President Diem's repressive policies and ineffectiveness against communism. This led to Diem's assassination and installation of a pro-US government, counting as a short-term success in replacing an ineffective ally. Long-term, it was a failure, causing political chaos that escalated the Vietnam War and strengthened the Viet Cong. Brazil, 1964.
I think we ought to take every step that we can, be prepared to do everything that we need to do. I had to get right on top of it and stick my neck out a little.
Under Operation Brother Sam, the US provided naval and air support, diplomatic pressure, and funding for anti-government groups, while the CIA facilitated a military coup against President João Goulart over fears of his leftist reforms. This installed a pro-US right-wing dictatorship, achieving short-term success in preventing perceived socialism. Long-term, it led to human rights abuses and repression, though it stabilized economically before democratizing in the 1980s. Dominican Republic, 1965 to 1966.
On the serious situation in the Dominican Republic, I reported the decisions that this government considers necessary in this situation in order to protect American lives.
The US intervened militarily during a civil war to prevent a perceived communist takeover, invading with troops to support anti-leftist forces. The US ended up installing a provisional pro-US government under Joaquin Balaguer, building on earlier CIA-supplied weapons for the 1961 Trujillo assassination. This blocked a Castro-aligned regime, making it a short-term success. Long-term, it resulted in ongoing violence and authoritarianism, delaying true stability. The US invasion and occupation resulted in about 3,000 to 4,000 deaths, including 2,000 to 3,000 Dominicans, mostly civilians and rebels, and 44 US troops. US intervention during the 1965 Civil War helped usher in elections and a transition away from totalitarian dictatorship to a Western-style democracy, though the path was complex. Ghana, 1966. Declassified US documents confirm significant American involvement, particularly the CIA, in orchestrating the 1966 coup that overthrew Ghana's president, Kwame Nkrumah. There was US diplomatic pressure and possible indirect support amid anti-communist fears, which played a minor debated role, but no direct actions like funding operations are confirmed. It was a short-term success in removing a leftist leader perceived as pro-Soviet, but long-term outcomes included political instability and military rule without clear US gains. Indonesia, 1965 to 1967. The US provided intelligence, weapons, and lists of alleged communists to the military, encouraging anti-communist actions following a coup attempt, which facilitated General Suharto's rise and the purge of leftists. This eliminated communist influence and installed a pro-US authoritarian regime, a short-term success. Long-term, it involved mass killings and repression, leading to instability and Suharto's eventual fall in 1998. The US-backed anti-communist Purge killed an estimated 500,000 to 1 million people, mostly suspected by the Indonesian Communist Party members and sympathizers. An additional 1 million were imprisoned or tortured, marking one of the 20th century's largest mass killings. Chile, 1973.
It was a report contained thing, but
he was instructed to.
Well, but
I hoped it, but he just failed. Son, that's his main problem. He should have
kept all the enemy from getting in. Well, in any event, State has denied it today, and they referred to your comments about Latin America and Chile, and so you just refer to that on that one.
Fine, okay.
Yes, sir.
Through Project FUBELT and other CIA efforts, the US-funded opposition groups conducted economic warfare and supported a military coup against Socialist President Salvador Allende. There was also a failed kidnapping attempt on a general by the CIA. This ousted Allende and installed dictator Augusto Pinochet, a short-term success in curbing socialism. Long-term, the regime's human rights violations and repression led to its end in 1990 with mixed economic legacies but political backlash. The US-supported coup killed about 3,000 people in the initial weeks, including President Allende, and hundreds in raids and executions. The dictatorship between 1973 and 1990 caused 3,000 to 40,000 total deaths through repression. Nicaragua, 1980 and beyond. The US has made significant attempts to influence or change Nicaragua's government, most notably by funding and arming the Contras to overthrow the Sandinista government in the 1980s, a policy that led to the Iran-Contra affair, and continuing efforts through funding opposition groups in the 2000s and the 2010s. These interventions have had a long history, including direct military occupations in the early 20th century to protect US interests, with short-term effects of conflict, economic disruption and displacement, and long-term effects of institutional fragility, entrenched political polarization, and deep mistrust of foreign intervention, dynamics that continue to shape governance, civil society, and US-Nicaragua relations today. Grenada, 1983.
The events in Lebanon and Grenada, though oceans apart, are closely related. Not only has Moscow assisted and encouraged the violence in both countries, but it provides direct support through a network of surrogates and terrorists. It is no coincidence that when the thugs tried to wrest control over Grenada, there were 30 Soviet advisors and hundreds of Cuban military and paramilitary forces on the island.
In Operation Urgent Fury, the US led a multinational invasion to remove the Marxist government after internal killings. Citing threats to US citizens, this installed a pro-Western government, achieving short-term success despite international criticism. Long-term stability was moderate, with relative peace post-intervention. The US invasion ousted a government, leading to free elections and a successful return to democracy. Panama, 1989.
Fellow citizens, last night I ordered U.S. military forces to Panama. No president takes such action lightly.
Operation Just Cause involved a military invasion to capture and extradite former ally Manuel Noriega on drug charges. The U.S. invasion was followed by installing the U.S.-backed Guillermo Andara, who held power until 1994. The removal of Noriega and the setup of a pro-US government was seen as a short-term success. Long-term, Panama faced economic challenges during the occupation, but led to democratization. The US invasion killed 200 to 300 Panamanians, combatants and civilians, with 23 US troops being killed in action. Afghanistan 2001 to 2002.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
In post-9/11, the US invaded Afghanistan with allies in 2001, using airstrikes and support for the Northern Alliance in an attempt to dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban regime that harbored them. The US established an interim pro-US administration under Hamid Karzai. This was a short-term success in ousting the Taliban and installing a new government. Long-term, this failed due to insurgency and the Taliban's 2021 resurgence that took full control of Afghanistan again. The Taliban gained $10 billion Australian in US military equipment after the disastrous US withdrawal. The US-led invasion killed an estimated 3,100 to 3,600 Afghan citizens and thousands of Taliban fighters in airstrikes and ground battles. The total war fatalities 2001 to 2021 exceeded 176,000, but the initial phases saw lower numbers. Iraq 2004.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The US-led coalition invaded in 2002 to remove Saddam Hussein over alleged weapons of mass destruction. The US deposed him, and he was eventually executed. Then they attempted to install a pro-US interim government amid ongoing occupation. The 2003 regime was a short-term success in deposing Hussein. Long-term, it led to chaos, ISIS insurgency, and violence, marking overall failure. The US-led invasion killed an estimated 7,299 to 9,200 Iraqi civilians and combatants in the first phase, then tens of thousands more in the ensuing war. Casualties were mainly from US airstrikes and ground operations. The total deaths between 2003 and 2011 reached 100,000 to 654,000, including indirect causes. Libya, 2011.
Tonight, I'd like to update the American people on the international effort that we have led in Libya, what we've done, what we plan to do, and why this matters to us.
Under NATO leadership, the US conducted airstrikes and provided intelligence support during the Arab Spring civil war to protect civilians and aid rebels in ousting Muammar Gaddafi. This led to a transitional council which eventually collapsed Gaddafi's regime, which was seen as a short-term success. Long-term, it failed, resulting in civil war, fragmentation, and militia control. The NATO intervention and civil war killed 6,000 to 8,000 civilians and thousands of combatants, with NATO airstrikes causing 60 to 400 civilian deaths. Venezuela, 2019 recognition, 2026 capture of Maduro.
Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II.
In 2019, the US under President Donald Trump recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as interim president amid disputed elections, imposing sanctions and rallying international support to pressure Nicolás Maduro's regime. This did not succeed in removing Maduro, who retained control, making it a failure despite diplomatic gains. In 2026, on January 3rd, US Special Forces conducted Operation Absolute Resolve, a raid with airstrikes to capture Maduro and his wife in Caracas for drug charges, extraditing them, and signaling a transition. The 2026 US raid killed 55 to 100 Venezuelan and Cuban military personnel, including Maduro's security team and civilians, primarily from US airstrikes and Special Forces operations. This was a tactical success in removing him, but long-term outcomes for Venezuelan stability remain uncertain amid fallout. Could Greenland and Iran be next?